Welcome to the Unitarian Fellowship of the Inward Coast. My name is Julian Wynn,
And I'm Melissa Wynn.
and we will be your service leaders this morning. We gather here today on the unceded lands of the Muskogee Nation of Florida. We are grateful for the land and those who tended it before us.
We are people of many different paths and beliefs who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. While diverse age, ethnicity, gender share the same views centered around love and acceptance of all. Our goal is to open minds, inspire spiritual growth, and ignite a passion for social justice. All are welcome to join us in building this loving community. It is lovely, too.
If you are visiting today, please fill out our card by the front door so we can connect with you. In your order of service, you'll find a description of upcoming services as well as announcements. Any special announcements? Postcard and t-shirts are here. Come chat about social justice and sign up for a t-shirt during snack time on Sunday. Share the Play in February. Our partner this month is
Yes. We'll talk about the share the plate later. Does anyone have anything else to say about the postcards and t-shirts? Anyone want to add to that? Yes, Jane. Awesome. Find Jane in the back. Stacy has the blue hair, so that's, yeah, she's the easy spot.
and the winter donation drive. So please donate. Should I say that?
You can.
We are more than halfway through our 3-month donation from our local unhoused community. The Social Justice Board has a printout and QR code with a list of needed items. Please place items in donation alley.
Yep, easy QR codes right here on your order of service, and I believe you can donate directly through, is it Amazon, Stacy?
Yeah,
And it will ship directly to Stacy.
and I'll
And-
recommend that way you don't have to worry if you miss a week
Yep.
or whatever.
Easy peasy. Okay, after the service, please stay for coffee, snacks, and conversation, followed by what we call second hour, where you will have your choice of several small discussion groups. So today's options, we have speaker circle. It'll be right here at the front of the sanctuary where you can continue the discussion of today's service. We're gonna have choir practice in the harmony room, and who to help and how, led by Cal Adams. Don't see Cal here yet, so assuming he'll be here, but fingers crossed. Now, the prelude prepares us for the service. Our chalice will be lit by Shua this morning. When all the people of the world love, then the strong will not overpower the weak. The many will not oppress the few. The wealthy will not mock the poor. The honored will not disdain the humble. The cunning will not deceive the simple.
Please stand in body or in spirit for the singing of our opening hymn, Come, Come, Whoever You Are. You are hymn number
188.
188 in the gray hymnal.
Three times. We're going to go do it 3 times through. All the children are invited to come to the front for our time for all ages.
You are a child. So I have a story for you today. It's not exactly Confucian, but it's one of my favorite Chinese stories. But I will need some help. I have props. You know me, I always have props. This is a boat. Use your imagination. Okay, I need one person at that end of the boat. You want to be in the middle if you want to see. So I need one person at that end and one person at that end. Just come up. Come on. Load up the boat. And Shua, you get in the middle. Oh, in the boat. And then you're going to, like, do what I tell you to do, okay? It usually works. So there was a man, and no, we're not fighting. We're just holding our beautiful sword gently because we love it. And he was crossing a river. It's even blue, see? And so he got in the boat with some other people, and the boat started to move slowly across the river. Well, the man, go ahead, move across the river, just this way. No, slowly, slowly. And the man's admiring his beautiful sword, and all of a sudden a big wave came. Whoop! And the sword fell out of the boat. Yeah, no, back there. Just drop it. It's wood. It won't hurt it. And the man said, "Oh, my sword. I'm going to put a mark on the outside of the boat where my sword fell so I'll know where it is." Just draw on the picture. Okay. And then the boat went all the way across to the other shore. And the man jumped out of the boat and ran around to where his mark was on the boat and started looking for the sword. But he couldn't find it in the water. He looked all in the water and he said, "Where is my sword?" And And the other people in the boat just laughed at him. So why do you think they laughed at him? So the the boat moved, but the water didn't. The story is about kind of two different things. One thing is that some of us are so stuck in our ways that we don't move with the times. Basically, the boat moved on, and the sword stayed there. So he never was going to find his sword again. The other thing I've heard about this story is we're looking for something. We may be looking for friends. We may be looking for spirituality that we like. We may be looking for God. And we keep going back to the same place to look for something. Like, you go to a new school and you go to the popular group all the time looking for friends. And you're not going to find, you never find the friends there that you want. And one day you sit down next to someone who's all by themselves and you find your best friend because you've been looking in the wrong place the whole time. So if you get stuck where you put your mark, you won't ever find what you're looking for. Okay? Thank you, children.
Sharing of joys and concerns. You are invited to briefly share personal events in your life by dropping a petal into the bowl or water silently, or while speaking a few words into the microphone, so we may support each other in sorrows and celebrate together in joy. This is a sacred time for us.
quiet meditation and prayer. I'm going to read some words before, and then we can take a few minutes to meditate on them. The Master said, "Having studied to then repeatedly apply which you have learned, is this not a source of pleasure? To have friends come from distant quarters, is this not a source of enjoyment? To go unacknowledged by others without harboring frustration, is this not the mark of an exemplary person?"
After a song of dedication, greeters will take up the offering. Generosity is a spiritual practice. Our fellowship is supported by our pledges and donations. If you're paying your pledge with a check today, please make a note in the memo line. We have a tradition in our fellowship called Share the Plate, where we split equally all cash donations and unmarked checks with a local charity. For the month of November, our Share the Plate partner is our very own food pantry on John Sims Boulevard. UUFECers Bill and Kathy White have been maintaining the pantry on their own for the years. Please be generous in your support of this very local UUFEC effort. Give Kathy and Bill a hug and thank you.
right, our speaker today is Amy Weisberg. Amy has been a member of the UUFEC since 2013 after moving to the local area to be close to her children and grandchildren. She started her Taoist arts journey in 1997 and has continued the path for the past 28 years. Today, we have the honor of learning from Amy about Confucius.
Hello. Me again. So this isn't the first time I've talked to this congregation about Confucius. He seems to come up a lot. I asked Amanda back last fall if I could give this talk because we were beginning to hear again a lot of talk about, oh, we have to hang the 10 Commandments in every classroom and every courtroom and all kinds of things like that. And I thought, please, I think we'd be better off hanging up the 8 virtues than the 10 Commandments. And of course, not many people knew what I meant. So I said to myself, you need to give this talk again. So you may ask, what are the 8 virtues? And who was Confucius? So you heard Melissa say I started Taoist practice in 1997, so it's been a long time. I never studied in school. I don't have a degree in Chinese history. I don't speak Chinese, except I can say 1, 2, 3, 4. That's about as far as I get. But the practice has enabled me to go to workshops and learn from people who are scholars and study, and we do a lot of talking in those. It's kind of like here. So now let me introduce you to Confucius. Confucius was born in 551 BC in the ancient state of Lu, which is modern Shandong province, just to the south of Beijing, to a member of the noble Kong clan. So he came from a very wealthy, important clan. He was born Kong Chu, because the Chinese say the surname first. But his students called him Kong Fuzi, or Kong the master, or teacher. So when the Jesuits showed up in China, speaking Latin, they heard Kong Fuzi and made it into Confucius. They Latinized it. So we know him as Confucius. So just so you have in your head when he was born, this was a century before the Golden Age of Athens. It's almost 500 years before Julius Caesar was assassinated. China, while not completely unified politically, was unified by a common language and a writing system that had been in use for nearly 1,000 years. What about the other Chinese religious and philosophical movements that they're familiar with? Lao Tzu, the somewhat mystical founding figure of Taoism, is said to have lived sometime between 600 and 300 BC. So that's 300 years. Nobody lived that long. That would possibly make him a contemporary of Confucius. There are legends that the two actually met, although that's not likely. And although Buddhism began in India around the same time as Confucius' birth, the first Buddhist community in China was not established until around 150 AD. And if any of you know, Journey to the West, the Monkey King. Yeah. Okay, this is the story of the Monkey King and his cohorts going to the West, to India, to bring back the Buddhist sutras. And of course, they ran into all kinds of adventures along the way, like dragons and, yeah. If you see, I don't know what channel it's on, like HBO or somebody made a whole series of this. It makes a good story. So that's the Buddhists coming into China. There also existed in China a great many folk religions with rich mythology, superstitions, astrology, divination, and other traditions. These old religions made their way into the Confucian cosmology and are the things that many of us have heard of. A lot of the New Year's traditions, having the kitchen god in your house, these are very, very, very old traditions. The teachings of Confucius, compared with other religious and philosophical traditions, had a strong, realistic sense of the concrete nature of the world. Confucians would say, we have no other world than this one. Whatever bliss the others might offer, we still have to raise our children and bury our parents. Confucians were skeptical of the more mystical promises of Taoism and Buddhism, but never sought to outlaw those practices. Taoists and Buddhists could not really find fault with Confucians, since Confucians always tried to be good and decent people. The worst that could be said about Confucians was that they were boring and pedantic. And I will tell you that I think this is my favorite. I am the person that corrects your grammar and your spelling on your post. That is a very, very Confucian thing to do. And tell you that you used the wrong word in that particular circumstance. He was like that. Confucius' father died when he was very young, leaving his mother and himself in poverty. Nevertheless, he managed to receive a fine education, probably through family connections of this big clan he was part of. He held positions throughout his life in what we would now call low to mid-level bureaucracy. What we know as modern China didn't exist at that time. There were many independent city-states. Many of the smaller city-states in the Yellow River Basin owed allegiance to the House of Zhou. During Confucius's lifetime, the Zhou dynasty was in decline, and there was much fierce fighting among various city-states. Confucius believed that there was a long history of true teachings preserved in the records of the early Zhou kings when things were going really well that could save the dynasty. These early kings had been able to build on the models of even earlier sage kings. Confucius tried to help, but the story is that he was frustrated that his ruler would not listen to his advice. Of course not. So he went on the road to search for records of the early sage kings and to offer his consulting services to other rulers. So he was a political consultant, basically. During these travels between the various states, he collected a group of students and a lot of old texts. The 9 basic works of Confucian teaching are divided into the 5 classics and the 4 books. So the 5 classics were old texts that Confucius gathered and used in his teaching, and the 4 books are compilations of the sayings of Confucius and his students, and one of his greatest students, Mengzu, who, of course, the Jesuits called Mencius. The most important of the 4 books is the Lun Yu, translated most often as the Analects. That's what this is. This is what I'll be talking about mostly today. And it's written, if you read it, it's written in like a conversation, like a student asks the master, and the master says this and answers the question. So it's little short segments, and it's actually very easy to read, except you're reading it in translation. Okay? So, and a lot of it's translating from this Old Chinese and New Chinese, and it's very different. So in this book, that middle section is the actual text, except that half of every page is a note. And this bit and that bit are also notes. So the only way to really read this is get several different translations, read one paragraph at a time, and all the notes. Because people living in different times translated this different ways, and it's very interesting to see them. So we're not going to do that, because that's a lifetime study. I also want to point out that a single national test for what we would now call civil service jobs was standardized in China in 1321 AD. Applicants were required to write out large chunks of the 4 books from memory and answer analytical questions on the 5 classics. If you had wanted a government job, that's what you had to do. This system remained in effect until 1905. That's a long, within like what we think of modern times. Like many great teachers in history, Confucius did not set out to start a new movement. He considered himself a transmitter of tradition, not a creator. He would have been startled to find out that Western scholars described the traditions he revered as Confucianism. Confucius taught with the aim of reforming society. The goal was to become a virtuous and exemplary person. Confucius was a strict teacher, and while he accepted students from all social strata, which was itself revolutionary at the time, he did not tolerate students who did not apply themselves or who were distracted by the future results of the education rather than the education itself. The master said, "It is not easy to find students who will study for 3 years without their thoughts turning to an official salary." Kind of like now. Okay. Confucius was also known as the first teacher, or as the teacher of the 10,000 generations. And if you hear anything in Chinese talking about 10,000 just means everything. So the 10,000 things is everything in the world. The 10,000 generations would mean everybody. In Confucian tradition, virtue is about cultivating your abilities so you can have an effect on the world. In other words, you can't be virtuous on your own, only in community. So his students would learn general precepts to guide them and then talk a lot. And then the problem became how to extend their learning into the world, into the community. So the thing that mostly that we studied during discussions were the 5, well, really the 8 virtues, but we'll start out with the 5. Okay. So those are the 5 basic virtues. The virtue of virtues in the Confucian world was Ren, variously translated as humaneness or authoritative humanity. It includes kindness, charity, civility, every aspect of treating people decently. Translators have used the words humanity, benevolence, love, and just plain good. So you see the problem with the translation. The unabridged Random House Dictionary of the English language defines Ren as a compassionate love for humanity or for the world as a whole. Confucius taught that Ren was too deep a concept to convey in words. So this is the first thing you should be cultivating in yourself. The second virtue is sacrifice, which involves examining your conscience and doing your duties without hesitation, without waiting for others to perform your deeds for you, and without expectation of rewards, and also without consideration of hardship and effort. When you work selflessly, help to relieve suffering in the world, give your share of family resources to our siblings and relatives, this is sacrifice. So one word becomes paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. The next one is ritual propriety, which is basically good manners. I mean, when you get right down to it, pay respects to heaven and earth, parents and teachers, host or guest. Be careful about your conduct and your manners. Do not be flippant, disrespectful, or bad-tempered. And then wisdom. And I imagine a lot of these you probably heard before. This is actually out of the Analects. The master said, Zilu, shall I teach you what wisdom means? To know what you know and know what you do not know. This, then, is wisdom. Wisdom in the Confucian sense can be equated with a love of learning. Then trustworthiness, honesty, trust, and sincerity. Do not exaggerate, do not be deceitful. If you make promises to others, you should be true to your word. If something does not belong to you, you should not desire it or take it. Even if something rightfully belongs to you, you should first find out whether taking it will cause harm to others. So those are the first five. Then there are also 3 more classic virtues. So these are the 3. The first one, filial piety, is most people will kind of translate that as ancestor worship, but that's not what it is. It's reverence and loving care for those who have preceded us, parents, teachers, elders. There are 5 basic relationships: the relationship between ruler and people, the relationship between parent and child, the marital relationship, the relationship between older and younger siblings, the relationship between older members of any group and their juniors. It's generally not understood that these relationships go both ways. So the second one is sibling harmony, and I love this one. So this has to do with maintaining harmony among groups of people, not just your blood siblings, but coworkers, schoolmates, people in the congregation. When we used to serve big dinners at the Tai Chi Society, and a lot of times we did Taco Tuesday because it was really easy. You could accommodate vegetarians and gluten-free really easily and spread out a buffet. And I always made guacamole, and everybody always wants to eat the guacamole. And you can only make so much guacamole. I mean, it's like, how much guacamole can you make in an evening? And so before we start the buffet, I'd get up and I'd say, so in the interests of sibling harmony, only take a little guacamole, and if there's some more, you can come back and get some. So this is like sharing. And the last one comes up in my thoughts a lot, and it's a sense of shame. And this is not how shaming got a really bad name in the West. You know, we shame everybody for everything, you know, fat shaming, gay shaming, you know, old shaming. This shame, sense of shame, is more like your conscience. A sense of shame is understanding the consequences of non-virtuous actions. So that if you do something that's not virtuous, if you take more guacamole and cause trouble, you know what you did, and you know that you did wrong. And I seem to wish there was more of that around. But those are the 8 virtues, and I think The only problem is they need a lot of explanation. But I think hanging those up rather than saying don't do this and don't do that, and it would be a lot better. So before I finish, I want to bring up probably just one more thing that's important to me, and as I studied Confucius' writing. So in the Analects, this is one of the things, were the Lord of Wei to turn the administration of his state over to you, what would be your first priority? Asked Zilu. Without question, it would be to ensure that names are used properly, replied the master. In old translations, this is called the rectification of names, or calling things what they really are. And this is also from Confucius. If language is not correct, then what is said is not what is meant. If what is said is not what is meant, then what must be done remains undone. If this remains undone, morals and art will deteriorate. If justice goes astray, the people will stand about in helpless confusion. So I have a couple examples of this. Back in the early 90s, and I was working, and I was an accounting manager at the Department of Education in Alabama, and I was a member of this group called the Association of Government Accountants. It sounds like a fun group, doesn't it? Yes, government accountants. And in that year, I can't remember what year it was, early 90s, the federal Congress passed a law, and it was called the Budget Reconciliation and Tax Reform Act of whatever year that was, 1990. And in our association, we said, it's not reconciling the budget, and it's certainly not reforming the tax code, it's making it more complicated. So within our group, we called it the Accountants Full Employment Act of 1990. So that's what Confucius really means about calling things what they are. The chalice extinguishing that we're using today comes out of our hymnal, and it's not written by us, it's written by a Unitarian minister. But one of the lines says, making war and calling it justice, indifference and calling it tolerance, pollution and calling it progress. And that's another thing where you're using a word and not the real word for what it is. Rebecca Solnit read an article that appeared in the English edition of Le Monde, and this was in November 2012, so I have trouble remembering exactly what was happening then. But she wrote in part, calling lies, lies, and theft, theft, and violence, violence, loudly, clearly, and consistently is a powerful aspect of political activism. Names matter. Language matters. Truth matters. So my plea is, when you're posting on social media, don't automatically repost from somebody unless you have actually read it and made sure that it says what you think it means. And I have stopped correcting people because they got too annoyed. But I get annoyed when somebody posts something that I kind of know what they meant to say, but they didn't say it. So that's my one plea. So there are some problems with Confucian teaching, as with most other systems of thought, either philosophical or religious. The notion of filial piety and the first of the 5 relationships between the ruler and the subjects has been used to justify autocratic regimes from the emperors of Japan to the Chinese Communist Party. Yet in other nations in Asia, most notably South Korea and modern Japan, the teachings of Confucius are completely compatible with a democratic society. And there are some things about these teachings which we as Americans are not completely comfortable. The idea of sibling harmony, which dictates that decisions be made by consensus, flies in the face of our majority rule and rugged individualism. Confucius's comments on accumulation of wealth led to an antagonism toward merchants. But the teachings of Confucius embody some basic principles that I value: love of education, respect for family, hard work, and the desire for a social order built on consensus and harmony rather than individual competition. Years and years ago, and I look back, I think it was 2010 actually, I was traveling in a car with some friends. We were coming back to Montgomery from a retreat in Tallahassee, and we were reading from a book that had just been published that had these 8 virtues in it, and discussing each of the 8 virtues in light of what was going on at that time. And compared to now, that time was really, really tame. That was Bernie Madoff and the governor of South Carolina taking the state plane to his mistress in wherever it was, Argentina. Anyway, there was all kinds of stuff like that. And there had just been a fist fight on the floor of the Alabama legislature. I mean, real fist fight. So we were talking about all these things. And we realized that these lessons are not dead rules from ages ago, but codes of behavior which we could apply to our current lives. And I thank you for listening, and I have some books with me, and second hour we'll sit up here, and if there's anything else you want to talk about, we can talk about it. Thank you.
Please stand in body or in spirit for our closing hymn. Come sing a song with me. Number 346 in the Living Tradition.